Welcome back to Half the Battle. I'm your host, as always, Daniel Levy, and today we're going to talk about the prelims for UFC Macau, Petr Yan versus Deiveson Figueiredo. So as y'all know, yesterday I did the main card. So it's funny, I told y'all yesterday I'm going to do the main card and I'm going to do prelims on a separate pod. I still got questions asking where the prelim picks were. And not just that, it's funny. I know some people don't listen, man. Like I was breaking down the Ricci fight, the Ricci and Yan Xiaonan fight, and I was like, yeah, I think Ricci's won either 5 of her last 6 or 6 of her last 7. The correct answer was 6 of her last 7. And someone leaves me a comment like, Ricci's not on a 6-fight win streak. Ricci's on a 2-fight win streak. I was like, dude, I said 5 of 6 or 6 of 7. And it was 6 of 7. But anyways, let's get down to business. Let's talk about these prelims. What I want to do is I want to talk about the most exciting prelims first. And then I'm going to talk about the more brutal ones after that. And when I say brutal, I do not mean highlight reel knockout. So first up in the flyweight division, we got a matchup between Carlos Hernandez. He's 9-4, taking on Tumendemberel, who's 8-0. Currently, they got it. Carlos Hernandez minus 183. The comeback on Tumendemberel is plus 158. So y'all have seen Carlos Hernandez fight more than once. I mean, he had one of the best fights on Contender Series history against Daniel Bairez. And in the UFC, he's been nonstop action. I mean, that fight with Victor Altamirano was awesome. The war with Tyra. I mean, Tyra kind of put it on him, but still, man. And even that last one against Ray Saruya, that was a scramble fest. So I really enjoy what I see from Carlos. The only kind of issue I have with Carlos Hernandez is that every single fight he's in where he has a chance of winning is super close. Like, he never truly separates himself. In fights that you think he could dominate, they end up going to split decision, right? There's not a single bad area in Carlos Hernandez's game. He's well-rounded. He trains with Bilal Muhammad, comes out of a good camp. Like, there's a lot to like about him. He's just not the best athlete, not the most physical. And that cost him in a lot of spots. And also an issue I had in that last fight with Saruya was, for example, the first few minutes, they had some intense scrambles, man. And we know that Saruya, another road to UFC guy, we know that Saruya, what he wants to do is he wants to get you to the mat. He wants to try to take your back and get you in that twister. And at first, Carlos Hernandez survives all the early scramble attempts. He gets back up to his feet. It's like, Carlos, you're exactly where you want to be. Go tee off on this guy. And he was so worried about the threat of the takedown that he didn't even let his hands go. And this is an experienced guy in Carlos Hernandez. It's not like we're dealing with some, like his opponent who's 8-0, who's kind of inexperienced. Carlos has been in there with some real tough guys. And when he was supposed to let his hands go, he didn't. And he clearly lost that Saruya fight. I thought Saruya got the first 2 rounds. But yeah, Carlos is well-rounded, and Carlos ain't bad. I just want to see more out of Carlos. And with this dude, Tumendemberel, man, I'm a huge fan of this guy. Like, he is a Mongolian killer. Y'all know how they called Orichi Lang the Mongolian murderer? I think we got to hand over that name to Tumendemberel. He's the new Mongolian murderer, because this guy just goes out there and he swings big. He knocks people down. He chokes them unconscious. Like that last fight he got where he got that rear naked choke. I mean, it should have been a knockout. He knocks the guy out and then he chokes him out. Like, he goes for it. Now, the issue I have, it's not an issue, but the issue that Tumendemberel is going to have is that he's kind of green. He's still developing. Like, you watch that fight he had a fight ago that it went to decision. He was kind of giving up easy takedowns against not the best opponent. The good news for him, though, is that that fight was well over a year ago. And when you're dealing with a kid like this, who's only 8-0, who's only 26 years old, you're going to be seeing these big leaps every single time he fights. So hopefully, for his sake, he's leveled up big time since that fight, because he's going to need to here against Carlos, because Carlos is the most experienced guy he's ever fought. I mean, experienced not in terms of the amount of fights he's had, because I see Tumendemberel's fought a 15-10 guy. He finished him in like 7-second knockout. But Carlos is the guy with the most high-level experience that Tumendemberel has ever fought. So I understand why Carlos Hernandez is favored. And I agree with him being favored. My issue is that, like, Carlos doesn't have that umph. He doesn't have that it factor. He doesn't really separate himself in fights. So if Tumendemberel, in this time that he's been gone, if he's just leveled up this much, I mean, I think this is the perfect opponent that he can come out here and fight close with and possibly win the decision. Because, like, think about it. If we're talking about, yeah, he's too green for Carlos Hernandez, that Ray Cerrulla guy is another one of these road to UFC guys that was super green, was coming in there with a 7-0 record, an 8-0 record, something like that. Like, so Hernandez has proven he can lose to these green, inexperienced guys. So, yeah, I mean, again, I get why Hernandez is favored. More experience, fought better competition, but I don't think he does enough to separate himself. So I think he's going to give himself every chance to lose this fight. So for that reason, I'm actually going to go with the upset. I'm going to go with Tumendemberel to come out here and win his UFC debut. I'm not sure if it's going to be a finish or not. I'm going to go with a controversial split decision. Next up in the flyweight division, oh man, this is the best fight of the entire card, at least of the prelims. And as far as the best newcomers on the card, it's these two right here. We got a matchup between Lone Kavanaugh, he's 7-0, taking on Jose Ochoa, who's also 7-0. And currently, they got it. Lone Kavanaugh minus 365. The comeback on Jose Ochoa is plus 290. In certain books, though, I see that plus 300. There is a little plus 300 action going on. Listen, man, these guys are absolute studs. I love both of them. And on one hand, it sucks they're making their debut against each other because one guy has to lose. But on the other hand, hey, let's find out who the better prospect is. So y'all saw Lone on Contender Series, man. He knocked out Antoine Ho in devastating fashion. And what I really liked about him coming into that fight was he's got great experience on his regional scene. He's been deep into fights. He's been hurt in fights and come back and won. He's starched guys. He's gone the distance. I like a lot about him. There's a certain explosiveness and swag that he brings to the table. It's almost like he's not just your average 7-0 guy. He's a guy that's seen some stuff. He's not a green 7-0. So I really think Lone Kavanaugh can come into the UFC and make waves right now. So when I saw Lone was fighting and I saw he was his big favorite, I was like, oh man, they must have matched him up with an absolute can. And then I pull up the tape on Jose Ochoa. Dude, I was so impressed with Jose Ochoa. He comes from Shoot the Box. You know what I'm saying? Same team as Charles Oliveira, but this guy's Peruvian, lives in Brazil, and he is a monster. He goes right after you with that signature Shoot the Box marauding style. And on the mat, I mean, this guy can get anaconda chokes. There's no safe place and no safe space against a guy like Jose Ochoa. Listen, I do think that Lone Kavanaugh is kind of a little bit more seasoned, a little bit more mature, and has seen a higher level. So I think he should be favored for that reason. But when I'm thinking like he should be favored, I'm thinking, maybe minus 200 at most. And here you see that plus 290 to plus 300 on Ochoa. I love Lone Kavanaugh. He was one of my top 5 prospects on that season of Contender Series. He was right up there. It was Malcolm Wellmaker, Mansur Abdul Malik, Jacoby Smith, Cody Haddon, and then Lone Kavanaugh. He was right up there, but I didn't know he was going to be almost minus 400 against a total stud. So it's 7-0 over 7-0. Like, yeah, okay, sure. Pure pick. I'll take Lone Kavanaugh because of the experience, the maturity, all that. But if I'm going to bet this fight, I'm going to roll the dice on this kid Ochoa at plus 290, plus 300 and see what he can do. Because like I said, I was very impressed. This is not just your average newcomer like some of these other guys we're going to talk about where it's like they have no business in the UFC. This is a newcomer where this time next year, he can be in conversations to get a top 15 fight, a top 20 fight. Like, I think Ochoa is that good. I think Lone Kavanaugh is that good. But again, the difference being that Lone, a little bit more seasoned, a little bit more experience, fought better guys. So I'm going to pick him for that reason. But man, like I said, Ochoa, complete stud. This is the best prelim fight of the card. This is the best fight in terms of 2 newcomers. And let me see how they look on the scales. And I might take an underdog shot here just on principle. Now, next up in the lightweight division, we got a matchup between Nikolas Motta. He's 14-5, taking on Maheshate, who's 10-3. Currently, they got it. Maheshate minus 190. The comeback on Nick Motta is plus 165. So I've known about Nick Motta for a very long time because he fought a friend of mine named Robert Hale. My friend Robert Hale knocked out Nick Motta in the first round. The only place you can check that fight out is on my YouTube channel. Type in Robert Hale highlight reel, and you'll see the absolute 1-round war he had with Nick Motta. So I've known about him since then. And man, Nick Motta is a killer. Like on his regional scene, he starched Joe Selecki in devastating fashion. Also, if you want to see a brutal knockout. If you want to see one of the most devastating knockouts that you've ever seen, pause this right now. Go to Fight Pass. It might be on YouTube. I'm not sure, but I know for a fact it's on Fight Pass. Type in Nikolas Motta versus Cesar Balmaceda. I mean, they had I'm not exaggerating this time. They had to bring in the stretcher. They had to bring in the smelling salts. They had to bring in, the thing on his neck. Like it was scary. So that's the kind of power that Nick Motta brings to the table. If you lift your chin a little bit too much, if you get into some careless exchanges in the pocket with a guy like Nick Motta, he's going to flatline you. I mean, let's look at his record right here. You see the 14 wins. How many do y'all think of those 14 wins are by knockout? 10 of those 14 wins are by knockout. So this guy is a KO artist through and through. But on the other side with Maheshate, man, he's a big boy for the weight class, 6 feet tall. And I feel like he's still kind of figuring things out. He's only 24 years old, but he's got some pretty damn good experience under his belt for being that young. He went out there, he knocked out Steve Garcia, who's on a insane, not win streak, but kill streak. And then most recently, he beat Gabriel Benitez in a fight that it was closer than it should have been. I definitely thought Maheshate won that fight, but those are the kind of lessons you need when you're a 24-year-old kid, cutting your teeth inside the UFC's octagon. So what he's got to look out for here is pretty damn obvious what he has to look out for here. If you do not get knocked out, you have a great chance of winning this fight. I think Maheshate has, on the feet, I think he's got more tools. Whereas with Motta, man, that left hook and that overhand, right? He's got some calf kicks too, but it's all about that left hook and that overhand, right? Those are just, he is devastating. Motta is. So, I mean, I do think he's got a knockout chance, of course, but I think that's his only chance. I think that Maheshate can also knock him out, but I think Maheshate can win the decision. Submission, I don't really see either guy getting subbed here. Watch that happen now that I just said that. But if it's a 3-round war, I lean a little bit more towards Maheshate. But it's just about, if you're picking Motta, it's because you've concluded that he's going to come out here and starch Maheshate, which there is a chance of. I mean, like I said, 10 knockouts on his record. He is that dangerous. So he can do it. But I'm going to take Maheshate here for the dub. Hey guys, I just want to give a huge shout out to today's sponsor, Bet105. Check them out at bet105.eu. They're an emerging sports book. They play the game the right way. They don't limit winners. They offer great odds. And of course, they have quick, fast, easy payouts. You're not going to have to go hire a money collector to get paid out. You're not going to have to answer a bunch of questions. Like, you're going to get your money, which is basically what you hope to do, especially if you're winning in these sports books. So, make sure you hit up my friends at Bet105. Thank you all so much for sponsoring today's episode of Half the Battle. And if y'all need a place to get some action on for UFC Macau, for NFL, whatever the case may be, make sure y'all check out www.bet105.eu. Thank y'all very much. All right, so those were the 3 best fights on the prelims. Now we got to talk about the rest of these fights. So next up in the strawweight division, we got the road to UFC championship. We got Feng Xiaocan, not Xiaonan, Xiaocan. But I think it's pronounced Xiaotan. Even though it's a C, I think it's pronounced Xiaotan, taking on Ming. So Xiaotan is 10-2. Ming is 16-5. Currently, they got it. Xiaotan minus 410. The comeback on Ming is plus 310. And I think the reason you're seeing this number on Xiaotan is the size difference here, man. I mean, let me pull that up real quick just to confirm. Yeah, exactly. It's 5'7" versus 5'2". It's a 66-inch reach versus a 60-inch reach. And not to mention the bigger opponent is younger by 7 years. And Xiaotan, she looks good for like a green Chinese prospect. She's physical. She's big for the weight class. She's out here finishing fights. I like what I've seen from her for a very green prospect, making their UFC debut. Xiaotan actually struck me as someone that, like, hey, you develop this girl the right way, she could go on to do some stuff in the UFC. Whereas her opponent, Ming, I don't think her technique is bad at all. I just think she's simply too small. Period, point blank. Like, if you're going to be 5'2" with a 60-inch reach in the UFC, you better be damn good. You better be really, really damn good. And unfortunately for her, it's not that she's bad. Look, she's had 21 pro fights. You know, she got some good experience. She even landed a really nice head kick in that first road to UFC fight. But I think the volume is a bit on the lower side, and not to mention the physicality is just simply not there. So in places where Ming can make up for size with technique, I just don't think that's going to be the case. I think she's going to get bullied here and possibly finished. So I'm gonna go with Xiaocan to come out here, win her UFC debut, win the road to UFC final, and possibly be a Chinese prospect to look out for. Next up in the bantamweight division, we got a matchup between Quang Bang Lee. He's 8-1, taking on Long Xiao, who's 26-9. Currently, they got it. Long Xiao -135. The comeback on Quang Bang Lee is +115. Another tough one because Long Xiao, he's got the more experience and he's probably the busier fighter of the two in terms of he goes forward and it looks like he's doing stuff even if it's not the prettiest. And I will give him credit because if you look at his contender series fight against Christian Quinones compared to his UFC debut where he lost that split decision, man, he's leaned out a lot. I thought he changed weight classes. He didn't change weight classes. He's just in way better shape now. And he tries hard. So I respect that quality in a fighter a lot. The thing about it is this dude, Quang Bang Lee, he's the guy that fought Chris Gutierrez. So he's on the lower volume side, but I think he's a decent counter striker. I think he's got more power here and possibly, don't quote me on it, but possibly more takedown upside than Zhao Long. Granted, I could see them both hitting takedowns in this spot. So kind of, this is one of those that's going to probably be a controversial split decision where like Zhao Long does more, but Quang Bang Lee hits harder, has the more impactful moments. So it's like, who do you favor more? It's tough because Zhao Long has more just MMA experience, but Quang Bang Lee going 3 rounds with Chris Gutierrez in your UFC debut, that's experience you can't measure. Just look at my boy Cody Durden. He did the same thing, except he got to a draw. He didn't lose a decision. And look what he's up to now. Since then, he's in the top 15. Not saying Quang Bang Lee's going to make the top 15 of his weight class, but all I'm saying is you can't scoff at the kind of experience you get with fighting either a current or former top 15 guy in Chris Gutierrez. But again, the dynamic of this fight just comes down to what do the judges like more? Do they like the activity of Zhao Long, or do they like kind of the bigger ooh-ah moments of Quang Bang Lee? Who's to say the fight even plays out like that? I have no idea, so I'm going to go with Quang Bang Lee here for the upset. These next two, I'm going to just keep it a buck with y'all. I did do my research for sure, but y'all heard Darren Till, shithouse. You're a shithouse. These fights, man, this is some of the most low-level UFC fights that we've had in a while, but let's have fun with it because next up in the bantamweight division, we got a matchup between Su Yung. He's 13-3, taking on Juntao Jenisuly, who's 19-5. It's actually Baljin Jenisuly, but if you're going to give me a fighter named Su Yung, I mean, come on. You're going to remind me of Rush Hour. Su Yung! You know what I mean? And we have Su Yung. We got to have Juntao on the other side. So Su Yung is 13-3, taking on Juntao, who's 19-5. Currently, they got it -155. Su Yung, the comeback on Juntao is +135. And basically, these two fight very similarly. They just don't have the same body type. Su Yung is short, stocky, going for the takedowns, and Juntao is tall and long, going for the takedowns. But I think the difference here is that Juntao has a little bit better striking than Su Yung. So that's going to be Juntao's path to victory here. Basically, I see both guys hitting a lot of takedowns, but the in-betweens is where I think Juntao is going to have the edge here. Because with Su Yung, man, he did some stuff I liked. Like, I'm sure y'all saw that clip of that judo throw to the cartwheel to the back kick that people have been posting online, and it looks great. You love to see stuff like that. But the issue is that they don't show you the context of what happens next. And what happened next was opponent Buddy just got back up right away. So, you know, all that effort for the cartwheel and the cameras and this and that just for your opponent to get right back up. These are two guys that I could be way off about this. I'm not convinced they're going to be in the UFC this time next year. But I do think that Jenisuly, Juntao, is the more well-rounded fighter here. So I'm sorry, Su Yung. Going to have to take another L here, Su Yung. But again, this is such a low-level fight that, like, you can't always, you know, account for the improvements that each fighter can make between the last time we saw them and this UFC debut, and also how they're going to perform under the lights. But based on what I saw, Jenisuly is the more well-rounded fighter and the bigger fighter here. And for some reason, the underdog. So For that reason, I'm going to pick Juntao Jenisuly to come out here and win the road to UFC. And last but not least, flyweight division. We got a matchup between Kiro Sahota. He's 12-2, taking on Dong Hoon Choi, who's 8-0. Currently, they got it. Kiro saying Sahota -110. The comeback on Dunho Choi. Well, it's -110 apiece, so there is no comeback. Man. This is the lowest level fight on this entire card. When you talk about this Sahota guy, for being some like Asian prospect, you know that guys from the NFC scene have beat Sahota in amateurs. I'm not kidding. Chase Boutwell, who like has been in the NFC since he was a kid. Chase Boutwell fought Malcolm Wellmaker, but back in the day, he fought one of my guys, Jamar Whitehead, in amateurs. Like Chase Boutwell beat this Sahota guy in amateurs, which is crazy. But Sahota, he's gone on to make it to this point. Wow, I would have never thought in a million years that Sahota would make it to this point. But I got to give Sahota a little bit of credit. He actually has some activity. He fights behind his jab. Like, his technique ain't bad. It's just that he's one of these tall, skinny guys that's kind of a pushover. His calves are there to be ran through. His head strike defense ain't the best. His takedown defense ain't the best. But on the other side, so it's like I watched Sahota and I was like, oh my God, this might be the worst fighter I've seen enter the UFC in a long time. I cannot wait to fade him. But then I pull up the tape on his opponent, Choi, and like Choi literally does nothing. Choi doesn't do anything. Choi will just stand around, not do shit. You look at your clock, 3 minutes have passed. Okay, now he's going to attempt the takedown. Like, now he's going to throw a punch. It's like, it doesn't take much to beat this Sahota guy. You do not need to be on a high level to beat Sahota. But when I watched Choi, I was like, he literally doesn't do anything. From a physicality standpoint, if you just compare their physiques, I mean, Choi looks like the real fighter here. Choi looks a lot better than Sahota, but when you compare their fighting, Choi just doesn't do a damn thing, man. I'm surprised he won these fights. It's like he didn't start fighting until like 12 minutes into these fights, man. And like, thing about it is Sahota is not very good, but I think he just has simply more activity than this guy. Like, I think that like while Choi is just waiting around for the perfect moment, Sahota is going to be popping his jabs, going to be mixing in calf kicks. Is just going to be doing more. So as bad as I think Sahota is, I think this might be the only UFC fight he wins. Because it's like, if I could tap into the brain of Choi and find out that he's actually like what his game plan is, and it's not just to stand around and do nothing, then I'd pick him here. But like the tape told me that, yeah, you can't rely on a guy that doesn't do shit. It's like the athlete that doesn't do anything versus the non-athlete that tries hard. Who you got, right? Give me the non-athlete that tries hard. I'm going to go Sahota here, reluctantly. So now we got to talk about the fight to watch and the fighter to watch. So what is the fight to watch on the UFC Macau prelims? My friends, it goes without saying that the fight to watch on the UFC Macau prelims is Lone Kavanaugh versus Jose Ochoa. I mean, when you're just talking about two absolute studs making their UFC debuts, you're talking about Ochoa and Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh has the hype from that big knockout he got on Contender Series. No one's heard of Ochoa yet, but I'm here to let you know this kid is the goods too. So for that reason, Kavanaugh versus Ochoa is my fight to watch. Who is my fighter to watch on the UFC Macau prelims? Obviously, I think Xiaocan is one to watch, but she's -400, so I'm sure y'all want me to give you a better option. What about Tumendemberel? Man, this guy's all violence. He's all action, but this is a step up in competition for him against Carlos Hernandez. But you've had close to a year off. Let's see what you look like coming in here against the toughest opponent you've ever fought, the most battle-tested opponent you've ever fought, but he's still a beatable opponent. And Tumendemberel, if he can just tighten up the in-betweens a little bit, man, he's going to be a problem just because the natural fighting instincts are there. The killer instinct, just the willingness to fight. The opposite of that dude Choi we were talking about, Tumendemberel's got it. But now you got to do it in your UFC debut against a seasoned opponent. Will you do it or not? So for that reason, Tumendemberel is my fighter to watch. Well, my friends, again, for those that don't pay attention, my main card breakdown is out already. So wherever you listen to Half the Battle, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, wherever, the main card breakdown is out. So you can go check it out. This is the prelim breakdown. Smash that like button for me. Hit the subscribe. Leave me a comment. But leave me a good, actually, no, leave me any comment. Love, hate, whatever the case may be. I'm all for it. Just don't be indifferent. You can follow me on Twitter at Best Fight Picks, on Twitter at Half the Battle HQ, on Instagram at Half the Battle Pod, on TikTok at Half the Battle Podcast, here on YouTube at Half the Battle Official. Thank you all so much for your support. Truly hope you all enjoy the fights. And until the next time, let's cash these bets.